Hello, thanks for stopping by. Whether you're listening on the podcast or whether you're watching it on YouTube, I appreciate you stopping by. I had an idea here a little while back about starting a series through podcasts and videos about something specific in the paranormal community. One of the things I noticed about the paranormal community is everything's, should I say, kind of like one-sided. You always see the videos and you hear the claims, and a lot of times it's a little hard to believe some of these claims. But anyway, you only see one side of the story, and it's basically what people believe that they're encountering or experiencing, versus what I'd like to do is have a common sense, reasonable conversation about these things, and we base this on what we know instead of what we believe. Because everyone knows just because you believe something doesn't necessarily make it true. So I'm going to try to do depending on how interested people are. If I get good feedback, we can do. I can do this once a week, once every 2 weeks. We'll see how it all pans out. And if it does take off, then I can do. I can join a streaming service, and I can have better backgrounds and better functions on the video streams and things like that. But for right now, this is kind of like we'll just call it a pilot episode, and we'll just throw our feelers out there and see how things work out. Before I get into anything, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you who have never visited my channel or don't know who I am, my name is Bill Highland. I am 55 years old. I've been investigating the paranormal since 2011. I'm married to Michelle, and I am a commercial printer by trade for 35 years. Now I'm going to keep this episode a little short. Basically, I'm just going to talk about two things. And hopefully at the end of this episode, actually three things. At the end of this episode, you'll have a good feel for who I am, where I stand, and the way my thought process works as far as paranormal research goes. Now, keep in mind, after hearing everything you're about to hear, I do believe in the paranormal. I believe I've experienced it. Can I prove it? No, I can't prove it. But I believe that I experienced it. Now, even when I say I believe I experienced it, it doesn't mean that's what it was. It may not have been paranormal. It could have been my mind playing tricks on me, which is, and to be honest with you, I often think if that's not what happened, but there's no way to prove it. At the time, I was just fresh out of the military. You couldn't have told me anything that would have convinced me that the paranormal existed in any way, shape, or form, for that matter. But I had an experience, and I'll share that with you now. And I'll make it as brief as possible, just so you have an understanding of how I got interested in this. It was 1989. I was at my mother-in-law's home. She owned an old log cabin that dated back to the 1700s. I mean, it wasn't a log cabin; it was a log home, and it was fully restored, and it looked pretty much as it did when they built the building, other than the modern conveniences of stoves and refrigerators and things like that. But anyway, I was meeting my wife there. She was going to meet me there after work, and we were going to run and do something. I don't recall exactly what it was. But anyway, I'm in the living room watching television. My mother-in-law's in the kitchen drinking coffee and reading her newspaper. We're the only two people in the house. So I'm in the living room, laying on the floor with my hands under my chin, laying on my belly, like a kid does watching cartoons on a Saturday morning. I'm just laying there. And my feet were out in the aisleway. And I was just watching TV. And a little while later, while I'm watching TV, my mother-in-law walks through the living room, and she steps over my legs because they're in the aisleway. And out of the corner of my eye, I watched her go up the steps. Now, it was kind of weird. I mean, I was paying attention to what was going on around me, but I wasn't focused on it. Like I can remember feeling the boards moving under my feet, the wide planks. I can remember the air from her house coat blowing across my legs. I mean, it was early summer, and I had shorts on. And like I said, I just kind of watched her out of the corner of my eye go up the steps. Really didn't think much about it, to be honest. And about 10 seconds later, she said to me, "Bill, do you want a cup of coffee?" And at that time, I can remember the hair. In fact, the hair standing on my arms right now, just thinking about this. The hair stood up on my neck and my arms, and I got up off the floor, and I was just in disbelief because she's still in the kitchen. Now, I know what I felt on that floor, and I know I felt the air move across my legs, and I saw her go up through my peripheral vision up the steps. I went into the kitchen, and I must have had one hell of a look on my face because she looked at me and she said, "What happened?" And I can remember thinking, I got to be real careful here because I didn't know how she was going to react to me saying, "Hey, I think I just saw a ghost in your house." And I didn't say it that way, but that's what I was thinking. And I said to her, I said, I thought you went upstairs until you asked me for a cup of coffee because I thought I saw you go through the living room. And she said, "Oh, that was just Mrs. Pence." Now, Mrs. Pence was the wife of the man who built this home. They have all kind of archaeological evidence showing who built the home, when it was built, who lived there, and so forth. And it was kind of dropped there. And to this day, that conversation has never come up again. She's never mentioned it again. I never asked about it again. But by her response, I can only assume that she had some experiences in that home as well. And I remember that really set me back. I was extremely confused about what happened there it was days and days and days that this was just going through my head. I was trying to make sense of what just happened. And of course, to this day, I still don't have any idea of what actually took place. Now, it never affected me in a bad way, but it opened my mind to possibilities that I never thought existed. So here I am today. A bunch of years later, I came across a flyer at a grocery store that people were looking for paranormal investigators, and here I am. So that's a brief description of how I got involved in all this. And like I had said, I hope that at the end of this, you'll have a good feel for who I am, where my thought process lies, and where I stand in this field. And I hope to be able to do episodes with guests that have interesting topics to discuss. And we'll see where it goes. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is people that investigate the paranormal. I'm not saying all, but there's a large percentage of paranormal investigators who are making outlandish claims, using tools and gadgets and things that they just completely don't even understand. And those are some of the topics we're going to be talking about in future episodes. And we're going to be very specific, things like thermal imagers and spirit boxes and portals and, all the things and all the tools that are used by different researchers out there. And we're going to talk about the facts of these devices, what they can do, what they were designed to do, and most importantly, like I said, what they can and can't do based on current paranormal hypotheses. So we'll get into that down the road. But one of the things that I'd like to talk about is I came across an article one time about Paranormal Unity. Paranormal Unity to me means something completely different to people that believe and participate and follow in Paranormal Unity. So anyway, I was online reading some forums, and I came across an article where they were talking about the scientific community and the paranormal. And I've heard this many, many times, and I never gave much thought to it. But for some reason this time I did. And an interesting set of thoughts went through my mind after I read this. And this is what I like to talk about. So anytime I refer to this article, I'm just going to refer to it as this statement because we've all heard this statement. The first thought that went through my head was, okay, why won't the scientific community take us seriously? So here's what I did. I put myself in the shoes of the scientists, and I looked at us through their eyes. And when I did, I saw a lot of obvious reasons why they take the stance that they do. And I could see their point. Now, does this mean the paranormal doesn't exist? I'm not saying that at all. But it does force us to ask questions and take a look at what we're doing and find ways to improve our thought processes and methods in paranormal research. I can take a perspective on this because I'm a researcher that I can appreciate and understand both sides of this argument. I have a strong faith or belief in the paranormal, but I can also appreciate the fact you have to prove the paranormal using a scientific method to do it. Just because you, like I said earlier, just because you believe something doesn't make it true. So let's talk about some of the specific things that the scientific community is talking about. In order to appreciate the rest of the discussion, you'll have to be 100% honest with yourself, be open-minded, and remember, in most cases, the scientists that we're talking about are a hell of a lot smarter than we are. Okay? So the first thing we'll talk about, and I touched on it briefly a little earlier, is the ghost or spirit box. I'm just using that in this conversation just as an example. When you watch someone use the ghost box, they'll ask a series of questions and then wait for what they call a relevant answer. Now, there's several obvious issues with this. First of all, there's absolutely no effort to account for the fact that radio transmissions are being received by this device. That's just so obvious, and it's completely unaccounted for. The ghost box doesn't have an on-off switch for receiving these radio stations, so they're going to receive them. And this is completely ignored. So if you can't eliminate 100% of the radio transmissions 100% of the time, how can you claim that it's something paranormal? Because you just don't know. And I never heard of a single hypothesis to explain how a ghost or spirit can produce electromagnetic energy in the form of a radio wave. These two examples alone cast enough doubt on the validity of the ghost box, at least in the way it's being used right now. Is confirmation bias at play here? I think it is. You're only listening for specific answers to the questions to ask, and you ignore all of the other words that are coming through. So, for example, if you ask the question, what's your name? You're going to be listening for a name. You know, you could hear 8 words in a minute, words like mask, tree, car, house, book, shovel, hand, and Joe. And you're going to say you heard the response Joe because that's what you're listening for. And you would call that a direct response. But what about all the other words? If you asked the random question like, what's tall and grows in the forest, then tree would have been your relevant answer and Joe would have been ignored. Now this is called confirmation bias. And I think that is at play here. EMF detectors. Now, there's 3 types of EMF that these detectors are sensitive to. They're sensitive to radio waves, microwaves, and electromagnetic fields created by the flow of electricity. Now, most paranormal research don't even know that there's 3 types of EMF, much less than, what those types are. The researchers hold out their device, they detect an EMF in an area, they have no idea how to understand the information that's being displayed, and there's no effort to find its source. The truth is it could be a Wi-Fi, a baby monitor, CB radio, cell phone, refrigerator, microwave oven, cordless phone, or any other man-made source of electromagnetic radiation. Even in a house with no electricity, it could still pick up radio waves from communication sources. And to make the matters worse, the single-axis EMF detector can only read fields on one axis at a time. This means that you have to tilt and rotate the meter on all 3 axes, your X, Y, and Z axes, and then you take the average. In all the years that I've been doing paranormal research, I've never once seen a researcher take that device and use it the correct way. And none of this is ever accounted for. So once again, there are just a few examples that cast enough doubt on the validity of the claim that the EMF detectors can detect ghosts or spirits. Did you ever think of where the idea came from that a ghost or spirit can manipulate or produce EMF in the first place? I've been researching this topic for a long time now, and I can't find a single example or idea where all this started. Everything is he said, she said, or they said, or there's just no credible accounts or explanation of how something paranormal can influence EMF in the first place. Now, if there's someone out there that knows something I don't, please share with me because I've been looking a long time to find these answers. My best guess is that, I could just see a situation where, okay, somebody was doing, say, an EVP session, and they were doing a real-time EVP session. They had headphones on. They asked a question, and they heard a response. And at the exact same time they heard the response, they may have had a hit on an EMF meter, and they just assumed that the two, the EVP and the response on the EMF meter coincided with each other. So therefore, ghosts or spirits have to be able to manipulate electromagnetic fields because it happened at the exact same time I got an EVP. That's the best hypothesis I can come up with, and I could be way off on that. It's just there's just no resources out there to explain where any of that came from in the first place. Another good example, thermal imagers, excuse me. They work by capturing infrared radiation that's emitted by an object's surface, people or animals. Now, anything above 0 degrees Kelvin or absolute zero emits some amount of infrared radiation. So to get a reading of temperature using a thermal imaging camera, the camera runs a series of algorithms based on the infrared radiation that's being emitted by that object and how easily it's emitted from that object. So what they're saying here is it detects energy emitted by surfaces and objects, and this requires matter or mass. A ghost has no mass. It's made of energy, right? That's the current hypothesis. So a thermal imager can't detect the temperature of the air, so therefore it cannot possibly detect a ghost or spirit moving through a room, assuming a cold spot in the air is what you're looking for in the first place. So regardless of what you're seeing on TV, this is a scientific impossibility. Thermal imagers cannot see the air. Now, for example, if you look on the right side of a FLIR device or an forward infrared looking device, a forward infrared camera, you'll see on the right side that there's a color key that shows the different temperatures based on color. Suppose the temperature of the room you're in is 80 degrees, okay? And the color code on the screen for 80 degrees is orange on the side bar there. Now, when you're looking through the imager, you're seeing all different kind of colors based on the temperatures of the surfaces that are in that room. If this thermal imager could see air temperature, wouldn't that entire screen be orange, the temperature of the air, considering air is everywhere? It doesn't do that because it can't see the air temperature. It's just it's just that simple. And for some reason, people are under the impression that they could see a cold air mass moving through a room. And that's never going to happen. Most of the examples that I've seen, if you know anything about thermal cameras and how they work, is a lot of times the reflections off surfaces, because infrared radiation does reflect off surfaces, and they look like shadows or something moving through the environment, and that's not the case at all. So here again, there's just more variables that are completely being ignored. Cell phone apps, tablet apps. In my opinion, these are the worst examples of paranormal research tools. First of all, what scientific tools or instruments are built into a cell phone that can possibly detect a ghost or spirit when you don't know what a ghost or spirit is in the first place? So how do you write software or build a device to detect something that you don't even know what it is? In order to build something to detect something, you have to understand what that something is. And since we have no idea what the paranormal consists of, you don't know what you're trying to measure or detect, so we just don't know what ghosts are. Another thing that is annoying to me, frankly, are when people throw around these paranormal terms and theory. This is one of the things that just gets my goat, I will say. I often hear people in the paranormal community say things like, the theory is this or the theory is that. Now let's understand. First of all, there are no working paranormal theories. Zero. There are none. Now there are many paranormal hypotheses, but there are no theories. Because in order to have a theory, you have to make an observation in the field. Say you have you observe an apparition, okay? What you have to do at that point is devise tests or processes to support your hypothesis that this is a ghost. Once you do that, and you find processes and tests that support your hypotheses, then you share that with your peers to have them run the same series of tests or processes, and then come to the exact same conclusions and results. And after this is done many, many times by many, many different people, and all the results are the same, then you have a theory. All we have are hypotheses or best guesses. We know nothing for sure, absolutely nothing. And that's why the scientific community will never take us seriously. We're all just walking around in the dark making all these outlandish claims, and we can't prove any of it. It's just that simple. And keep in mind, we're the ones making these claims, okay? The burden of proving the paranormal falls on the ones making the claims, not the ones who question them. So when we make a claim, we should be able to defend that claim because the scientific community does, okay? Now, these are very few of the reasons the scientific community will never take us seriously from my standpoint, and I can certainly understand why. So, what do we do to change this? Well, it kind of starts with us. We have to devise sound and reasonable hypotheses based on our experiences in the field and then test them. And then we let just others do the same thing. We have to understand how the tools work that we use. And we have to understand and be able to interpret the information that's being given by these tools. We absolutely have to make sure the tools make sense based on the current paranormal hypotheses. We can't just keep walking around the dark holding tools when we have no idea what they're detecting or what they're measuring. We're not fooling anyone. Obviously not the scientific community. So when you say or hear someone say science can't explain everything, remember this. Science describes things that makes up our reality. So if ghosts exist in our reality, we should be able to explain it scientifically at some point, right? And if ghosts are real, like I said, we have to be able to prove it at some point. Otherwise, they're not in our reality to begin with, which is a possibility. I mean, it's just as feasible that it never does exist and everything we're experiencing is something completely different. We just don't know. So, these are the kind of things that I think about. And when I read articles like this and I think from this perspective and I put the shoes on, someone else's shoes on and I'm looking through their eyes, you tend to be able to have a better understanding and a better way of thinking about things, especially when it's related to something like the paranormal, something that is just so, I don't know how to say it, but it's just so not mainstream, and there's so many takes on what's going on here, and with no one being able to prove anything, where do you start? So another thing that I wanted to talk about here briefly is Paranormal Unity. Now, when it comes to paranormal, we all decide what's evidence and what's not, and what research methods to use, and most of them don't, most of the time we don't have common viewpoints. Sometimes we have opposing viewpoints. Those that can back up the research with scientific explanations are the people we should be listening to and siding with. Now, we can listen to the views of opposing opinions, but we shouldn't have to show unity with others just because we're both interested in the paranormal. Now, in my opinion, there's two sides of paranormal research. There's those that copy everything they see on TV shows and just follow the latest fads or what other groups are telling them to do and their experiences and blah, blah, blah. And then you have those that think for themselves regardless of how unpopular it may be or, regardless of what kind of flack you may catch over it. Now, I would guess that most investigators are TV copy investigators is what I call them. That would explain why, they're running around with K2 meters, ghost boxes, and different devices being used the way they're being used. Based on their own hypotheses, nothing they're using makes sense to prove their own hypotheses. Again, it doesn't mean that they can't, but based on current hypotheses, it's basically just because what they saw on TV and used by celebrities, not scientists. So you shouldn't follow a trend just because you see it somewhere else. So you should ask yourself, why would 5% of the investigators out there, roughly, like me, that operate pretty much by ourselves, we want to side with why would we want to side with the 95%? That don't. There's very, very little common ground here. The sort of paranormal investigators that copy what they see on TV shows aren't helping their claimants or paranormal research in general. all they're doing is spreading misinformation because they just refuse to do the legwork and the research on what's being presented or observed to them by others. Or, maybe it's because it'll make them unpopular with the majority. So if you only reply to the criticism that I have is that I'm, closed-minded or jealous or I'm trolling, this just simply illustrates my point. We as a country have lost the ability to sit and have a logical, reasonable conversation. Even if both sides disagree on the points, the talking points, it doesn't mean that we can't have a discussion. At the end of the day, we can agree to disagree and move on. But very rarely do you see that anymore. And that's kind of what I'm trying to start here, is just a general open conversation where you can say what you think, based on, as long as you have a reasonable, explanation as to why you feel, why you think the way you think, or, at least something reasonable, not just these crazy outlandish schemes just because you simply believe it. If you're going to post something, a video or whatever, and, there's an outlandish claim in there, if I have a question, I'm not trying to troll you. You're the one making this claim. I just have a question about it. And first thing they want to do is, oh, you're a troll, you're this, you're that. And I'm like, wait a minute, you posted this for peer review. I'm asking you a question about it, and you're giving me grief because I have a question. Like I said earlier, you're the one who presented this video as quote-unquote evidence. It's your burden to prove it. So when someone asks you a question, when you put something out there for others to review, you should be able to explain it. I think Paranormal Unity is counterproductive. I think it's just some fancy buzzword. Why would you show unity with people that post information, that post false information or discredited material, or use questionable investigation methods based on bad science? It reflects bad on anyone that associates with them. So not only should you not be unifying with them, you should actually be walking the other way. Another thing with Paranormal Unity is respect. Respect needs to be earned, not just in paranormal research, but in life in general. Paranormal Unity means that this respect is automatically given without being earned, okay, which is total BS. And what they're really saying is, you believe what I say, and I'll believe what you say. We won't have to do any of the work or answer any of the hard questions. And if you can't take personal criticism of your own claims or beliefs, what that means is you don't have enough proof or information to explain it. Not just to other people, but more importantly to yourself. If you see things one way and someone else sees it another way which contradicts yours, you think the other person's wrong. Okay, we can't all be correct. But the person with the evidence or research to back up their claim is going to be more credible than someone that can't. Now, this doesn't mean that people aren't entitled to an opinion, but at least be reasonable and make a half-ass attempt to explain it before you post information as quote-unquote evidence. In paranormal research, everything is about using the best tools to do the job, and some of the tools simply don't fit based on current hypotheses and basic science for that matter. It's about credibility of the things being presented. If you wish to, if you want to follow a scientific method regarding the paranormal, part of the process is peer review, and like I talked about that before. Excuse me. In many cases, your peers may choose to reject the evidence presented because it's not researched properly. Now, most of us aren't scientists, but we can understand science when it's presented to us. And like I said earlier, if you post something online, you should be able to explain your position or defend your claim. You can't just post something and just ignore reasonable questions that other people might have because it doesn't fit your particular narrative. One of the worst things about Paranormal Unity is those that are neutral on everything because it risks their quote-unquote fan base. They're more concerned about their popularity than with the research. So, if you want to make advancements, then you have to be prepared to make some noise. Even if it ticks off a bunch of people on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, when it comes to paranormal research, facts don't lie. It doesn't matter what other people think, when you're dealing with the truth. So, when you're joining a group or a community like this, Paranormal Unity, It's actually just, a big propaganda tool for the people that started it. I mean, think about it. So at the end of the day, none of us know what the paranormal consists of. We can speculate, we can hypothesize, we can take a leap in faith. We all believe what we believe based on our own upbringings, our own experiences, and our own belief systems. But we can't go around making claims of something being paranormal when we can't explain what it is we're presenting. Now, this is just an opinion, not proof. And just because you believe something doesn't mean that I have to blindly jump on your bandwagon in the name of Paranormal Unity. I'll have questions about your claims, and we all should. Now, just to show you the state of affairs, I recently put together a quote-unquote paranormal quiz. Just basic paranormal technology questions, about the tools that are used in paranormal research, what they do, how they work, things like that. Now, granted, it's a very small sampling. It was 54 people that participated in this little quiz, and I went through all the data. I have everything put together that I'd like to show you. We should be alarmed. Let me just say that. Now, granted, it is a small sampling, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the whole paranormal investigative community as a whole. However, from what I've seen over the years, I am guessing that it's relatively close overall. So here's that quiz, and here are the results. At the end of this little video here that I'm going to show you, or in the podcast you'll hear. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see the graphs, but they'll be explained to you. And you'll see the state of things right now in paranormal research. Now, I just want to say one thing about this first. There were several samples of people that took this quiz that were supposed to be techs in the research teams. And every tech that took this basic test, or this basic quiz, every one of them was in the bottom third in scores. And these are the people that are walking around teaching other people in their groups how to use this equipment, which is totally ridiculous. So anyway, here's the video. I'll get back on at the end for my exit conversation, and take a look.
I put this quiz together a short while ago to just try to get a general feeling of where the paranormal community stands as far as their knowledge of paranormal equipment and methods during investigations. I was kind of surprised at some of the results. Now, keeping in mind, as this disclaimer says, some of the questions may not have been clear enough for people, and there might have been some misinterpretations of what the question was, and therefore some of the answers may have been answered incorrectly. I've taken that into account, and this isn't a scientific test by any stretch. I mean, this was just to get a general feel for where we stood in the paranormal community. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over the results of the test, each question and the percentages of those who got it right and wrong, and talk about each question just a little bit. Before we get to that, I would like to say that I was really surprised. In fact, I was kind of really disappointed because I had sent out invitations to literally, 8, 10, 12,000 people to take this for me, and I could barely scrounge 54, 55 people to do this test. And that's really bad. And this is through different online communities that I belong with, G+ channels, YouTube's, Paranormal Warehouse, personal friends that I sent the links to, through Facebook. And I mean, literally, it was thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and only 54 people participated. I think that's what it was. So for those of you that did take it, I thank you. And after seeing these results, I do understand that this was a very small sampling, and it may not be an overall representation, but I feel like it's pretty close considering a lot of the answers and the trouble spots are very consistent. So let's move on. Okay, here's a little insight to the quiz and its results. The scores on the test go anywhere from 0% up to 100%. Each question was awarded 5 points. So if you look at the lowest score of the test, we have one person get 10%. We have one person with 100%. If you look at this point distribution, it's kind of alarming. a vast majority of the people, as far as averages, scored a 55%. And of course, in school, anything below 70% is going to be failing. So it looks like we had 3 people out of 54 that actually passed this quiz. Now, I'm keeping in mind that there were some questions that may have been a little misleading or a little tricky, and they may not have been clear. So there could have been a few more than that. But overall, these scores are horrible. First several questions are ungraded questions, so I'm just trying to get a feel for who's using what and what methods are using and that kind of thing. So the first question is, do you use a voice recorder on investigations? 48% use them and 51% do not. Do you use an infrared video camera on investigations? I was kind of surprised by this because infrared video cameras aren't that expensive, and to see that only 31% of the people use them was kind of surprising to me. Do you use a thermal imager on investigations? 22% use thermal imagers and 77% do not. I'm sure that this has to do with cost and cost alone. Otherwise, knowing what I know, everyone else would have them too. Do you use digital cameras on investigations? And this one's split even, 50-50. 50% use them, 50% do not. Do you use an EMF meter on investigations? 44% of the people use them, 55% do not. Do you use a tablet or phone apps on an investigation? 33% use tablet and phone apps, while 66% do not. Are you a tech on a paranormal research team? 7 people were, 47 people were not. I looked deeper into the results of the test scores for these 7 individuals, and for every one of those 7 individuals, they finished far below the bottom 1/3 of the test results. This should be very alarming to anyone in the paranormal research field, because we have these people scoring in the lowest 1/3 teaching other people how to use equipment. That should be disturbing to everyone that's watching this. What is the electromagnetic spectrum? This is the first graded question. We had 18 people, or 33% of the people, get this correct. And the answer is all possible wavelengths or frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that extend from gamma rays all the way to the longest radio waves. And this includes visible light, IR light, and UV light. What does EMF stand for? This is no surprise that almost 80% of the people, 43 people, got this correct. It is an electromagnetic field. Now, for 7 people, the 13%, this could have just as easily been correct for them as well. This is one of those gray areas I was talking about. What is an electromagnetic frequency? 53% got this correct. It's how often an energy wave passes per second. What is a wavelength? 40 people, or almost 75%, got this correct. What is a nanometer? This one, I don't understand why it was missed so much. 20% said it was none of the above, and I have no idea what they may have thought it was. But a nanometer it's a very small measurement. In fact, to be very specific, it is 1/1 billionth of a meter. What is the wavelength of infrared light? And the answer to that is 750 nanometers up to 1 millimeter. 15 people got that correct. And again, the vast majority, 31.5%, said none of the above. What is the wavelength of ultraviolet light? 13 people, 25%, almost 24%, got that correct. It is 400 nanometers to 10 nanometers. And again, another majority, 14 people, got that incorrect at 750 to 900 millimeters. What does an EMF meter measure? 11 people, or 20%, said electromagnetic radiation flux density, and that is correct. The vast majority of people, 40% of the people that were asked this question, thought that an EMF meter measures wavelengths. It does not measure wavelengths. What things can an EMF meter detect? The vast majority of people said all the above, and they were correct. They can microwave ovens, cordless phones, cell phones, baby monitors, electric motors, and there's many, many, many other things that it could also detect. And 6 people said none of the above. I'm guessing those people decided that EMF detectors detect ghosts. I can only assume that. What is the proper way to use single-axis EMF detectors? This one's kind of split in all different kind of directions. We have 3 incorrect answers that are very close to each other: 25%, 22%, 27%. They were all incorrect, obviously, but in order to get an accurate reading on a single axis EMF detector, you have to take measurements on all 3 axes. That's the X, Y, and Z axes. And then you have to average the 3 to get your result. Generally speaking, what does a thermal imager do? Another one of those that was basically split into 3 major groups. 15% got it correct, that it identifies and detects infrared energies that are emitted from objects and surfaces. It detects environmental temperatures, but only on surfaces. That's why that one was considered incorrect. 30% of the people think that an think that a thermal imager can see temperature differences in the air, and that is 100% incorrect. Thermal imagers cannot see air temperature, regardless of what anyone tells you. When taking photos at night, how should you properly use your camera? This question kind of came across after setting the test up and setting it out there. It kind of came across as a trick question. It wasn't meant to be that way. And the reason that it's none of the above is because not one of the answers even mentions a tripod. 99.9% of all quote-unquote apparition or ghost photographs that I take are always blurry. And the reason they're blurry is because no one uses a tripod at night with a long exposure time or slow shutter speed. So you're going to have blur. And if you use a tripod, you eliminate blur coming from, obviously, holding a camera. So the answer I was looking for was none of the above. Digital cameras use a resolution called a megapixel. What is a megapixel? This is another one of those that was kind of hard. I didn't expect a lot of people to know this. In fact, I didn't know it when I put it together. A megapixel was 1,109,000 pixels. And the reason I learned this before I put this in the test was because when I wrote my book, I had that in there and I had to do some research, and I came across that little tidbit. Okay, what is one disadvantage of an MP3 format on a voice recorder? There's actually several, but the largest and the one that I was looking for is that an MP3 codec compresses the high and low frequencies out of a recording, therefore removing possible EVPs on the high and low ranges of those frequencies. And what is an EVP? 96%. Most people knew it's electronic voice phenomenon. Where do EVPs come from? Here's where it gets a little tricky. No one knows for sure where they come from. 32 people, or 59%, which means there's 40% of the people that were incorrect, which you had between you had 18%, or 10 people said EVPs definitely come from ghosts or spirits. The truth is, we just don't know. Cell phone apps are used to detect the paranormal. How do they work? The answer is none of the above. First of all, no one has ever used a cell phone or an app. They haven't been shown to do anything that people say they do. There's no hardware or software within those apps or phones or tablets that can detect the paranormal. It's all just speculation and very, very loose hypotheses as to how these things work. But to this point, no one has shown that they work. What is paranormal theory? It's an explanation of something that's acquired through the scientific method. Only 24% got this correct. And a whopping, overwhelming majority, 57% of the people think that a paranormal theory is an idea based on their belief. So that tells me that people think the word theory means belief. And that is very far from the truth. And what is a scientific method? 77% of the people said it's a method of procedure used in science, which is kind of strange considering the last question. Go back to that. What is a paranormal theory? 57% of the people think that the theory is a belief, but yet a vast majority said that it's a method of procedure used in science as far as the scientific method is concerned. So this really confused me. So of all the questions in the results, here are the most frequently missed questions. And if you look down you can see the proper way to use an EMF detector. Only 9 people got that correct. When taking photos at night, only 7 people got that correct. I mean, you can look at the results for yourself here and see where the people know the least amount based on what we know, not what we believe. So you can take all this and any way you want, and you can look at the results and interpret them any way you want. It's just a small thing I put together to try to get a feel for where we stood and to have some basis for those thoughts.
Now, for those of you that are listening on the podcast, right now the video is displaying the 54 responses. Of course, I'm blurring out the email addresses. So anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me here for this little bit of information. I appreciate any feedback in the sections below. Any questions or comments, your opinions, any show ideas, anything like that, you can just post below. I appreciate your time, and we will catch up with you folks at a later time. For those of you listening to the podcast, you could reach out to me through my YouTube channel. Do a search for Dover Paratech, and my contact information will be in the About section. Thanks, guys. Good night.